Hello, my name is Rich Sander, and today we're here with Tony Davis. He wrote a book. It says, God Loves You. It actually says, some restrictions may apply and many other Christian dilemmas. It's not what you think, is it? That's intentional?
That's part of the red flag operation.
The red flag. What got you interested in writing this particular book?
That is a very long story, but as a former Southern Baptist Bible banger, I grew up in the buckle of the Bible Belt in North Alabama. I used to be a true believer, like so many people that no longer are. And one of the things that I was always told is that one of the few infinite perfect things in the universe is God's love for us. And that's just unquestioned. But when I actually started reading the Bible, which was one of my first mistakes, I discovered that God did things like killing almost every single man, woman, and child on the planet in a global flood, because I believed that really happened as a fundamentalist Christian. And I had a hard time reconciling that with infinite perfect love. And even if my children no longer believed in me, I don't think I would punish them like that. So that was sort of the genesis, if you'll forgive the term, of the thought process for the book.
Yeah, so in the book you have many stories about how you were a believer, and now that you're, I believe you can say you're an atheist, right?
Absolutely.
You're an atheist. Are you a humanist?
Yes, yeah. I think that's an appropriate, accurate description of myself.
Are you a secularist?
Yes, absolutely.
And you're pro-science?
Love science, huge fan. Yeah.
So what's your background in, you were in the military for how many years?
Yeah, a total of 27 and a half years.
21. Gotta get that half in there, right?
Yeah, everything counts for retirement pay
does.
and for a lot of other reasons. But 21 and a half years active duty. When I was still in high school, I enlisted in the Army as a combat engineer, later military policeman, and then went to college, did ROTC. And upon graduation, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in military intelligence. And then for the next 21 and a half years, that's what I did. So I was a professional soldier all over the world.
So what countries were you deployed in?
It might be easier to say which ones I wasn't deployed. One of the things that appealed to me about joining the military is I wanted to see the world. One of the many jobs I had, by the way, I was a company commander in recruiting command, and we had a concept called TEAMS. It stands for Training, Education, Adventure, Money, and Service to Country. Everybody that joins the military joins for one or more of those reasons. And for me, adventure, travel falls under adventure. I wanted to get out and see things other than North Alabama. I needed money for school, by the way. That was one of the reasons I joined, and they've so far paid for a bachelor's, a master's, and now they're paying for my second master's that I'll be completing in December. But so far I've been to 49 countries and 45 states, and most of those countries were deployments of anywhere from, I either lived there for a year, 3 years, or 8 years in the case of South Korea, or it was 2 or 3 weeks at a time just for a brief training mission.
So what did you enjoy most about your military service over the 23 and a half years?
27 and a half. Don't cheat me.
23 years active duties. Okay, I got it.
I think the travel and getting to experience the rest of the world was probably the most rewarding and enriching thing. A lot of the things that I did as a military intelligence officer, frankly, I did the same thing no matter where I was. If I was in Fort Meade, Maryland, Seoul, South Korea, Jordan, Iraq, the job was mostly the same. Different target set, different threat, specific threat, but really getting out and seeing that so much of just the insular experience of the world that I had growing up in North Alabama, how different it was. And, you know, as a former Christian, I truly believed with all my heart growing up in Alabama that you needed Jesus, for example, to be a good person. But then I go to Cambodia, a country that's almost exclusively Buddhist, and a lot of really good people there. They love their children just as much as I love my children. They don't believe in Jesus. I'm sure some do, but most don't. See the same thing everywhere I go. But just seeing the rest of the world, learning the different cultures, the history, languages, which I sometimes butcher, that I think is probably the most rewarding thing.
So you had this journey between growing up in Alabama, and now you're an atheist. Was there a certain turning point for you, or was it a gradual? Tell us a little bit about your journey to where you are now.
I think this is a fairly common story for former believers that are no longer believers. There wasn't a single day where I just woke up and said, "Oh, wow, I'm an atheist now." Yesterday I was a Christian, today I'm an atheist. It was a very gradual process. As I mentioned, I was formerly a fundamentalist Christian. I did not just believe in God, but I believed that the earth was about 6,000 years old. I believed that God created the earth in its current form, created humans in our current form, about 6,000 years ago in 6 24-hour days. That was all of creation. And I didn't believe that because I was an unintelligent person. Most of the Christians I know that still believe that are intelligent people. This is just what they're told by people in positions of authority, their parents, their teachers, their religious leaders. And that's what I believed. But then I started studying science, and I've been a huge fan of science for as long as I can remember. I mean, going back to, I'm 53 years old, so I remember the original Cosmos series, and I would listen to Carl Sagan talk about things about how the universe is about 13.7478 billion years old. Well, that clearly conflicts with 6,000 years. And when I listened to the rationale, we've got an old book that says it versus scientific evidence, facts, evidence, reason, and logic. That was just so much more compelling to me and so much more convincing. It slowly started chipping away at the edifice of my belief. So I was still a believer. I believed in God. I believed that Jesus was his son who died for our sins, but I didn't believe he did it 6,000 years ago. I believed that maybe God caused everything to evolve over billions of years for cosmic evolution and millions of years for biologic evolution. But it was still something God caused. That's what I believed. But then I started delving deeper, and it just slowly, things like the Bible being the good book. Well, if you actually read it, there's some good things in the Bible, but there's also rape, slavery, genocide, things that are either directed by God or at least not condemned by God. I mean, never once is slavery ever condemned anywhere in the New Testament or Old Testament. And I think that's a pretty easy one to get right. So then I started believing the Bible's not necessarily good. I started seeing contradictions in the Bible. One of the appendices to my book, I list out the genealogies of Jesus according to Matthew and Luke. If you compare those genealogies between David and Jesus, one lists 43 generations, the other lists 28 generations. Only 2 of the names match out of every one of those names. Well, that's a clear contradiction. If it's wrong about that, what else might it be wrong about? So that just kept contributing to my sort of the unraveling of my belief. Over the years, I had one experience after another that just further contributed to that. I know that it's often said there are no atheists in foxholes. The very first time that I ever remember actually affirmatively identifying myself as an atheist, I was in a combat zone. I was in Iraq. And I had an unfortunate experience with a chaplain who turned out to be a very unscrupulous person. Again, very long story, but the short version is he was convinced that he had to save my soul and bring me back into the fold of Christianity. And when I just listened to his rationale, it was just some of the poorest argumentation, some of the things. For example, he was trying to make the point that I can't critique him for believing in Jesus just because he never met Jesus. And he tried to use the example of asking me who did I think the first president of the United States was. And I don't know if you've ever heard this argument, but I thought I knew where he was going. I thought it was, well, you've never met George Washington, so why do you really believe in him? It's faith.
Yeah.
So in my mind, I'm getting ready for that. I'm getting ready to say, well, the reason I believe in George Washington. So I told him I believe George Washington was the first president of the United States. And he said, well, why do you believe that? And so I said, well, an undeniable wealth of historical information, confirmed by multiple sources, never once contradicted by any reliable source. And his response just floored me, and it was a life-changing experience for me. He said, well, you know there's more evidence that Jesus rose from the dead than there is that George Washington was ever existed in the first place.
What?
And I thought I misunderstood. I said, hey, can you say that again? And he said it again. I was like, wow, you're really trying to tell me that there's more evidence Jesus rose from the dead Jesus, by the way, a person we don't really know for a fact ever even existed. I mean, maybe he did. I'm not going to follow my sword and say Jesus didn't exist. But we really don't know for sure that he did. We certainly don't know that he rose from the dead. But the chaplain insisted that there was more evidence that Jesus rose from the dead than George Washington ever existed.
And he wanted to provide that information?
Well, I was so incensed by the assault to human reason and intellect, and frankly, the insult to my personal intelligence, that I was furious. I didn't even ask him I didn't ask this particular chaplain, what is that evidence? So I went back to my chaplain of my unit. That was a chaplain of a different unit. And I had this dilemma that I had to address. You know, how could this guy, who's supposedly a man of God, a leader on things of ethics and morals, I thought, how could he say something like that? So I went to my chaplain and I recounted that story, and the chaplain said, "Oh yeah, it's true. There is more evidence that Jesus rose from the dead than George Washington ever existed." I'm like, wait, and I literally said, "What is it with you people? Where are you getting this?" And his explanation was, because there are more copies of the Bible, and the Bible is the evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. And my almost immediate response was, there's probably as many copies of Spider-Man comic books as there are copies of the Bible in print right now. And the comic books say that Peter Parker lived in Queens, and we know Queens is a real place, so it's not far from here. And he thought that was a silly example I was using, and maybe it was, I don't know. But I certainly don't.
He thought it was a silly explanation for your rationale, and his was just
perfectly logical.
There's more printed books.
Yeah. We have more copies of the Bible, different languages, different, we have different little fragments of pieces of the Bible going back. And I admit, it's an old book. It's been around for a long time. Many people have copies of it. I don't know how many people have actually read it. By the way, one of the dilemmas I address in my book is that most Christians know amazingly little about what's in the Bible, and yet it's the only source manual they have for knowing about the nature of God. So,
well, you had to experience that a lot in the military, where people were believers and they were insistent on that, and you're an atheist now in the military and stuff. How'd that experience go for you in terms of how to deal with that? Because I'm sure you deal with that all the way till today in the military.
Absolutely. In fact, I had one experience. The last unit that I worked in, it's a mouthful. It's called the Special Operations Command, Joint Forces Command. We were a group of special operations observer trainers. We traveled around the world for about 180 to 200 days a year, going all over the world training counterterrorism and special operations forces. And we were on a training mission in Croatia, one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life, by the way. And my nickname is OB. And a guy that I didn't know walks up to me and goes, "Hey, are you OB?" I said, "I am." He said, "You know, you're a pretty brave guy." And I had no idea what he's talking about. I was like, "Okay, why?" He said, "Well, you're openly atheist and you're an Army officer." I was like, "That takes bravery?" He goes, "Yeah, it does," because and he's kind of looking around, making sure who's listening. He said, "Yeah, a lot of people won't admit that, not in the military, because the military tends to be a fairly religious organization, and we have chaplains in every unit. Many times events are preceded or closed with an invocation of some sort." And I really, again, going back to this situation with the chaplain, for a variety of reasons, I only shared one story about this chaplain. I decided at that point that my life was going to be very different. Up to that point, I had really started questioning my belief. I probably was already an atheist, although I didn't really like using that word because I thought it had a lot of the baggage with it that a lot of people today think, that I claim to know for an absolute fact there is no God, or I worship the devil, or I hate God, I'm mad at God. I didn't realize, it just means theists have not met their burden of proof in convincing me of their claims. And I also thought, by the way, I called myself an agnostic. I didn't realize, I thought those terms were mutually exclusive. Now I call myself an agnostic, atheist, anti-theist. I don't know if there's a God. I don't believe there's one. But I don't think there's one, but I also believe that the net harm of religion outweighs any good that ever comes from it. But when that situation happened up until that happened with the chaplain, I had, if someone asked me about God or about going to church, I would make excuses. I was, yeah, I'm still a believer. I still have a relationship with Jesus, but it's a personal relationship. Or I haven't found a new church yet, but yeah, I'll get around to it. After that, I became fairly unapologetic. And like many new atheists, I was probably a little bit more in people's face than I should have been for a period. I got over that fairly quickly, but to this day, I will not approach strangers. If I see somebody reading a Bible at a coffee shop, I'm not going to go up and say, hey, look, that's, and point out the flaws in the book. I would never do that. But if someone wants to approach me, I welcome it. I enjoy it, and I love to decisively engage with people that want to tell me about the truth of their message.
Sometimes that happens in New York, and sometimes that happens in the military.
It's happened at some surprising places. I mean, growing up in the Bible Belt, and I have a house down in Virginia. I lived there for a long time. It was fairly frequently I would be reading something at a coffee shop, like maybe a Dawkins book or Hitchens or something like that, and I would have somebody walk up to me and ask me about it, and that was just the excuse to start the God talk. You do realize that what's going to happen to you if you don't come back to Jesus, and we don't want that to happen to you because we love you, that kind of thing. But this happened in South Korea, which that shocked me, that I would have Koreans who, and of course you can't paint any group of people with a broad brush and say Koreans are like this. Some Koreans are, some are not, some are different ways. But as a culture, they tend to be a little bit more less likely to talk to a complete stranger than Americans might be. So very often in a coffee shop or a subway, most people are just looking straight ahead, kind of minding their business. But several times I had people, complete strangers, just walk up to me and, hey, do you love Jesus? In English. I had one guy on a subway walk up and said, hey, I have a question. And I thought he wanted to practice his English because that happens a lot there. I said, sure. And I was with a lot of my buddies, and it became quite funny, actually. And he said, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I said, well, that's easy. He goes, yeah, the chicken. I go, no, the egg. Because fish were laying eggs for millions of years before the birds ever evolved, So, yeah, the egg came first. You didn't say chicken egg, you just said egg. So eggs came before chickens. He goes, no, the chicken. Because Jesus said, I'm like, well, stop. Let's get back to the chicken and the egg. And he kept trying to shift it to Jesus. And I'm like, no, we're going to finish the chicken and the egg conversation first. We're going to start talking about Jesus now.
I don't know what parable it is that Jesus talked about the chicken and the egg. I don't know what that was. Maybe that's one of the Gnostic versions of the Bible. I don't know.
We never got that far because I wouldn't let him get beyond the chicken and the egg because I insisted that eggs came first and he insisted chickens came first. So we had to agree to disagree on that one. And then eventually he disengaged, which is something I often see when people want to talk about Jesus. Mm-hmm. They'll talk about it all day long until you start talking back. And then it's, I got to go. It's kind of time for my Bible meeting or something,
In the book, you want to make a point about how the Bible and religiosity is important to some people, but its basics and foundations are not examined. And can you tell me about how you were looking at writing this particular book and the message that you wanted to mainly say by writing this?
Sure. One of my really good friends down in Virginia who is actually a philosopher, he read an early copy of the manuscript and he asked me a very fair question. He said, Tony, who are you writing this book for? I said, let me think about that. And you know what? A lot of this book, I have to admit, is very self-serving. I wrote it initially for me. I wanted to examine my own beliefs and why I could no longer believe what I had believed for so long. And then I started looking at the beliefs of all of my friends and family who are still believers. Because again, I don't think I suddenly became more intelligent when I stopped believing. I don't think that my religious friends are any less intelligent. We just disagree on this one idea. And so I also had a very hard time articulating. I heard, I think it was Bertrand Russell talking about the teleological argument, maybe it was ontological, where he said it's easier to identify that it's wrong than to identify why it's wrong. And so when I started trying to articulate why I no longer believed, it was a real challenge. So this was a sort of a cathartic process of me getting my thoughts down in a very formal, rigorous way, and reading as much as I could possibly get my hands on, and evaluating all of the apologetic arguments. One of the things that drove me crazy is a couple of my Army buddies, well, one was Air Force, one was Army, when I was in Special Operations Command, Joint Forces Command, invited me to an apologetic conference. I'd never been to an apologetic conference before. Man, what an experience. I had never seen such blatant lies and disregard for facts, evidence, reason, and logic in my life. And there was so much wrong with it, I had a hard time just putting my finger on what, this is more wrong than I can possibly articulate. And why is that? And it was because there are otherwise very, very intelligent people that if you were to say, hey, should I buy a Ford or a Chevy? They would use the tools that we have for making effective and informed decisions: facts, evidence, reason, and logic. Well, the maintenance records are better with this one, the resale value is better with this one. But then when it came to their belief in Jesus, all of that went out the window. It was, we've got this old book, or we've got this cosmological argument, or some form of the teleological argument, and none of it made sense. And the one that really drove me crazy was the minimal facts argument. And there's a guy named, you probably heard of him, Mike Lincona. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he stood up there and talked about these 12 basic facts about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. None of those things would rise to the level of a fact. That was sort of the real beginnings of me trying to articulate this book: is what do I believe and why? What do Christians say they believe and why? And I laid out, there's a complete, I think the second longest section in the book is about it's basically counter-apologetics. The major apologetic arguments, what do they say, why they are wrong. And I think I did a pretty good job of dissecting those arguments. The longest single section of the book is actually about the Bible. What does the Bible actually say? What do we know about the Bible, about where it came from, about who wrote it? I can't tell you how many times I've had Christians tell me, well, what do you mean who wrote it? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they wrote the Gospels. Well, no, they didn't. Even Bible scholars agree that's not who wrote that. The first part of it is just sort of my devolution story, how I started out as a believer, I became a non-believer, then the counter-apologetics, then the true nature of the Bible. And then I finish it off with why this matters. Why should you all care? And this is where it stops being self-serving. It's for a variety of other audiences. If you are an atheist and you have a hard time articulating and arguing your point the way I once did, well, this will help. It's sort of a textbook for that. If you are still a true believer, then it's for you too, because I want you to understand that I am. You asked me if I'm a secularist. I am. I swore an oath a long time ago to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I still believe in that. I really do. But I also believe there's more than just one amendment. It's not just the Second Amendment. There are a lot of others. And we have freedom of religion. Freedom of religion includes freedom from religion. And it includes freedom of someone to be a Muslim, a Jew, a Hindu, a Sikh, whatever. And not just a evangelical Christian.
Or an atheist.
Or an atheist. You can be an atheist. And I support a religious person's right to worship just as much as I support my right not to.
Yeah.
But I want the true believers to know that we have really good arguments for why we don't believe what you believe. And if you want to force your beliefs and force your beliefs off on us, then we have ammunition to use against that. And so think about it before you come at us with that. For example, there's a section where I talk about lies. Now, there's a debate to be had. What actually constitutes a lie? We can look out the window over there and we can see if it's raining. If we both look over there and we see it raining and you say it's not, then you're either lying or I don't know, you're not telling the truth. But if there is no window and you don't really know if it's raining outside, then maybe you're just mistaken. But there are things that I consider lies of religion, like America is a Christian nation. Well, no, we actually had the first explicitly secular constitution in the history of the world, as far as I know. So no, we're not under any circumstances were we founded as a Christian nation. We were founded as a secular nation, comprised largely of Christians, which is fine. I mean, there's a lot of a-holes in America too, but we're not an a-hole nation. We are.
Those are some other nations I hear.
Yeah, not us. But yeah, and at the very end, the final point I try to make is that I really do believe, I'm convinced of this, and I think this is supported by the evidence, that this is the greatest time in the history of our species to be alive. It really is. I'm 53 years old. I have already lived longer than the vast majority of the approximately 108 billion people who've ever been born. And I have every reason to believe that I've got a couple more good decades, maybe 3, maybe more. And the quality of the life that I have right now is far better than almost anybody ever that has ever lived. We live happier, longer, more prosperous lives than humans ever did. And that's because of the hard work of smart people that have tried to make it a better place, using facts, evidence, reason, and logic. None of those solutions were ever brought to us by religion. And we do have some very, very pressing problems, though. But most of those problems, I mean, some of them are just natural, but a lot of them are man-made problems. And no matter how terrible you are, I don't think that's God being terrible. I think you're just a terrible person doing what you might think God wants. Or, I mean, there's been some terrible atheists too. Hitler's not one of them, by the way, but I hear that a lot. You know, well, Hitler was an atheist. No, he wasn't. At least there's no evidence that he was an atheist. So I point that out, that if we want to continue this progression of happier, longer, healthier lives, we need to work together. That means working, whether we believe in God or we don't believe in God, we're all in this together, and we need to act accordingly.
In your experience in working with people who have a opposite viewpoint, whether it's friends, family, or in the military in terms of work and stuff, you come up against this wall of people that are saying that atheists are bad people or they're the worst people because they don't believe.
Yeah.
And that is to me was a telling ethic for me when I was like, you're hating people just because they don't believe and don't understand or whatever. You know, if somebody doesn't have the mental capacity to understand and they're not professing, you hate that person too. It's like, I don't understand that. But you went through this in the military where people were bothering you about your atheism, right?
Yeah. To be fair, most of the people that I worked with in the military, even if they disagreed with me, they were open to my freedom because they took the same oath I did to support and defend the Constitution. One of my absolute dearest friends, I spoke with him today. We've been friends for about a decade. Retired Army Green Beret, super guy, but he's a Southern Baptist. And we used to have some amazing conversations about why he thought I should believe what he believes and how he respects my right to. He's one of the people that invited me to the apologetic conference I mentioned earlier. But never once has he ever said, you know, you're going to go to hell and you deserve it, though other people have said things like that to me. But most of the people I experienced in the military, they would say things not even realizing the danger of what they were saying, but it was never directed at me. If I can share one of the other seriously life-altering experiences I had, there was a conference I went to called CCJO, Capstone Concept for Joint Operations. Probably never heard of it, right?
Never heard of it.
Yeah, most people haven't. But it's actually one of the most important meetings of its sort in America. Every few years, you get together the most senior leaders from the U.S. government, from the military, from the diplomatic corps. There were just tons of 3- and 4-star generals, ambassadors, and I'm sitting there as a lieutenant colonel. And depending on your perspective, that's a high-ranking officer. In this room, I was low man on the totem pole. And my buddy that I was there with, I assured him that I wasn't going to say anything because I'm around all these, like Newt Gingrich was there, Fran Townsend was there, and again, just tons of 3- and 4-star generals. So my goal, to not be noticed by anybody. And a lady who was from the Central Intelligence Agency, Directorate of Operations, stood up and said something about how Islam can never be moderated the way Christianity has into a religion of peace. Individual Muslims might be peaceful, but Islam cannot be peaceful. And she's standing right in front of me, and I'm looking at her. My buddy's like, just chill. My buddy knew I was, and
Just hold off,
yeah,
hold off.
and I was like, I wanted to hear the punchline. And she said, it's because the Quran is such a violent book. The sanctions for violence in the Quran will keep Islam from ever becoming a true religion of peace. And the thing that got me was when I looked around the room, almost every single person, nobody challenged her on it, but almost every single person was nodding in agreement. And that belied to me an ignorance both of Islam and of Christianity, of the holy books. And I raised my hand, and my buddy's like, he audibly said, oh shit. And I said, surely you know that there are more acts of violence in the Bible than the Quran directed by God. And everybody shifted their attention to me, and I was like, uh-oh, I just messed up. And she says, what are you talking about? I said, if you take the Quran and the Bible, lay them down, start flipping pages, and put a tick mark every time God says to smite someone, to kill every single one of them, maybe except for the virgin females, or every one of them that breathes, including their livestock, you have more acts of violence in the Bible than the Quran. Now, in fairness, Bible's a bigger book, so as a percentage of the total book, I think the Quran has a little bit more. But sheer number of violent acts, the Bible has more. And a chaplain, another one of my chaplain friends, Air Force colonel, said, you're talking about the Old Testament. Sir, what's your point? The Old Testament doesn't matter? He said, no, it doesn't. I said, oh, then why was Jesus necessary? And so I'm in a full-blown debate now with two people that outrank me, and I have the attention of most of the senior leadership in the U.S. government. And
Catching a little attention at this conference, aren't you?
Yeah, and that was not my intent, but that's how it played out. So I said, why was Jesus necessary? And the chaplains, what kind of question is that? I said, I think it's a really good question, because without the Old Testament, we have no prediction of the coming Messiah, which I think you probably believe Jesus was. He goes, yeah, of course I do. Okay, and there was no original sin of Adam and Eve, so there was no reason for Jesus to come give that substitutional atonement, which, by the way, is not a very good idea. It's kind of evil, human sacrifice, when God could have just said, you're forgiven, because I made a mistake the way I set everything up. And I really thought I was in a lot of trouble. The chaplain was not happy. The lady from the CIA was not at all happy with me. But my mentor, who was a retired 4-star general, came over, and I said, sir, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't. He goes, no, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to challenge everybody's assumptions in here, and you got all these people thinking now. And so he made my day, because if anybody in that room was going to come down on me hard, it was him. And he said, that's exactly what you should be doing. So
got them all thinking.
Yeah, got them all thinking. I had several more conversations with both of those, the chaplain and the CIA lady, that were a little bit more cordial for the rest of that week.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah. It's sometimes they talk about planting a seed in religion, to mustard seed, and it grows into a big plant. And here you planted a seed in somebody's mind, and I assume that's what you're doing with the book too, is planting that seed of doubt and questioning. And as a humanist, these are some of our core values, as to question and to question those assumptions that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hardly consider myself an expert on secular humanism, but one of the things that conversations that I've had with many of my Christian friends is when we talk about what's in the Bible. Again, I freely admit there are good things in the Bible. There are some things that are good. There's even, although it's kind of rare, there's poetic beauty in the Bible. I love the language of the King James Version. I don't like what it says, I just like the way it's written. But there's also this horrific, terrible stuff in there. One of the conversations I've had more than probably any others is when I'm told that homosexuality is wrong by one of my religious friends. And I just know that's going to be a fascinating conversation. I just know it is. So it's wrong. Why is it wrong? And I had this conversation with a relative not that long ago. And he started out with, well, it's not natural. Really? Every mammal species that's ever been observed has demonstrated at least some homosexual behavior. Every single mammal species. Sheep, I think it's upwards of 30%. So I think it is natural. It's I'm aggressively heterosexual myself, but I can't see how homosexuality is unnatural in any way. And I said, by the way, speaking of natural, how did you get here to where we were? He lives in a different state. He said, well, I flew. Oh, that's perfectly natural. 36,000 feet at 3/4 the speed of sound in a metal tube. Yeah, that's natural. But then I knew it was going to go there. He said, well, look, in the Bible, it says that it's wrong. I said, absolutely it does. Leviticus 20:13, it says if a man lies with another man as he does a woman, it's an abomination. They should both be put to death, and their blood will be upon their own heads. And so we're going to go out and kill homosexuals now. No. Well, it turns out this particular relative has a gay child, and I knew that, and he knew that. And he said, no, we're not going to kill homosexuals. Well, the Bible says it, though. The Bible says they shall be killed. So how do you decide which parts you follow and which parts you don't? And by the way, let's go over to Red Lobster and start killing all those people that are eating shellfish, because that's a death sentence too. Or the people at Walmart that are working on Sunday. We've got to kill them too, because it says so in the Bible. No, we don't do that. Well, how do you decide which parts we do and which parts we don't do? Homosexuality is wrong, but we don't kill homosexuals. So we're completely ignoring one part of it while paying attention to another part. And I truly believe the way we determine which parts we want to follow, it's up to human intuition and the understanding of the impact of our actions on other people. I just think that some people, unfortunately, their judgment in this matter is still kind of clouded by that book.
Do you think intuition is the only thing that makes a decision about what is right or wrong in terms of how people are looking at their ethics?
Yeah. I don't think I don't personally put it so much in intuition as a well-reasoned evaluation of the impacts of our actions. I had a Marine buddy that I think he oversimplified it, but I think he has a little bit of a point. He said, hey, blunt force trauma is what morality is all about. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I know if I go screw around my buddy's wife, he's going to bash me in the head with a bat. And that blunt force trauma is one reason I'm not going to fool around with his wife. I was like, well, there are other reasons not to fool around with his wife.
Yeah, of course.
But that is a reason. Yeah, I know that if I do something really crappy to somebody else, I'm going to be treated poorly. The golden rule,
yeah,
which greatly predates Jesus, by the way. I mean, we know that. But I'm often told, well, Jesus said, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Well, not only does that predate Jesus, I actually think that, can't remember which philosopher it was I heard talking about it, said that the golden rule is actually not a good idea. You should never do to others as you would have them do unto you. You should do unto others as they would have done to themselves. And I was like, oh, that's actually a good idea. That's a good point, So he called it the platinum rule, and I'm drawing a blank on who actually said that right now.
Do unto others as they do want to be done unto themselves?
Yeah, as they would have done to themselves, yeah.
Well, I don't know. Sometimes people don't treat themselves very well either.
Yeah. Well, you know Matt Dillahunty, the Atheist Experience?
Yes.
Somebody used that example with him, and he said, hey, some people like being whipped. That's their thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that the rule that I would think would be, treat people as better than you would treat yourself or want to be treated. Do a one up. What is the harm of a one up on treating and dealing with other people and stuff? So
sounds like a good idea to me.
So in your military experience, you had to come to the realization that you're an atheist. You no longer believe in those religious precepts. What is that humanist values that you look for that you want to teach other people? Than saying, okay, there's a religious set of values and these are humanist values. What are these humanist values that you want to teach other people?
Well, I guess when I think about the true existential threats, again, I've already said it, I guess more than once, that this is the best time in the history of our species to be alive. But fortunately, through our knowledge of science, we kind of see something coming that may drastically alter that. Global climate change and this anthropogenic global climate change. Yeah. This is clearly something that is caused by human activity. And if we don't do something about it very, very quickly, this trend of our lives being better than they ever were in the past may just fall off a cliff. And, not only, I'm not going to be around to see it. I said I have every reason to believe I'm going to be around for a couple more. Something bad could happen tonight. Hope not. But I'll probably be around a little bit longer. But I probably won't be around long enough personally to suffer through the effects of global climate change. My children may. My grandchildren almost certainly will, and I have 2 grandchildren now. And I really don't want them to suffer through that. But not just people that I'm related to. I actually have this deep, abiding love for humanity. Every time I travel to another country, one of the things I want to do is get to know the local people. I don't want to hang out with other tourists. When I went to Belize earlier this year, and I asked the young lady at the hotel to recommend a restaurant where I could go get some drinks and some food. She says, yeah, the resort next door is really nice. I said, no, I went there for lunch. Everybody looks like me. They're all tourists from Canada, America, some part of Western Europe. I want to go where everybody looks like you. And I didn't know this yet, but she was a Garifuna. The indigenous people of Belize are called the Garifuna people.
Okay.
Fascinating little culture they have and their language. Although it's a British Commonwealth, so everybody speaks English, but they have this beautiful lilting accent. And she, oh, you want to go to my cousin's place? So I ended up having way too many drinks and some amazing food at a little shack that was put together with driftwood, scrap lumber, and corrugated tin. But I was the only white person there. I was the only person that didn't have that local indigenous Garifuna accent. And it was amazing. Just some of the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life. And I want this planet to be here for them and their grandchildren too. And I'll never see those people again. But I gotta tell you, certainly I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for the average Christian. But when I was a Christian, one, I didn't believe something like that could happen because one, God wasn't gonna let it happen. Mm-hmm. But it didn't really matter anyway because God's coming to end all this stuff anyway. This life doesn't really matter that much. The next life is what really matters. That's what I believed. I absolutely don't believe that now. You got to live this life. It's the only one you get. Yep. Maybe there's life after death. I don't know. But I know there's life before death. And I know that. And so I'm living it as fully as I can. I've done a lot of pretty cool things personally. Yesterday I took my first paragliding pilot's license lesson. I'm going for another one tomorrow. I've done that twice, once in Korea, once in Bali, Indonesia. And so that's just something else I want to do to enjoy this life. The Christian ethics were, love the Lord, do what you think God wants you to do, and you're golden. I think that our ethics should be more, let's serve each other. Don't serve if God's real, he sort of deserves to be ignored because he's really gone out of his way to hide himself. This epistemic distance thing doesn't work for me. Any God that is invisible and is not manifested in any way in the physical world, can't be tested under any way that we know of testing anything, it might as well not exist anyway, So let's focus on each other and keeping this world a good place for.
So focusing in on each other and looking at the world in terms of a naturalistic viewpoint. You were mentioning looking at the world through testing and understanding and learning and observing and stuff. Those are our basic principles of a scientific method, understanding the natural world and stuff. Do you think that there is a way that the world, as you've seen it, because you've traveled all over the world, that can be a part of the future that helps us in a way that we can get away from religion, or you think that religion is going to be always here and always something to deal with?
My personal best guess is that as long as we have human beings, we will have some form of religion. I don't think we'll ever get completely away from it. But I do think there's hope that we can get away from it a lot more than we have in the United States. This is something I talk about in the book, going back to the idea that the notion that America is a Christian nation. Yeah. Well, of course America was not founded as a Christian nation. In fact, a lot of the trappings of being a Christian nation are pretty new things. Not that far from here in New York State is the birthplace of Francis Bellamy, the guy that wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. And when he wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, there was no reference to God in it. It wasn't anything, there was no reference to, it was one nation, indivisible. It wasn't under God. That was only added in the 1950s, just like In God We Trust added to our money. And it wasn't necessarily done for religious reasons. It was, to separate us from those godless communists, our mortal enemy. And I get it. I can, as much as I don't like it, I can sort of understand the thought process back there. We thought these people might actually wipe us off the planet and we have to keep them from doing that. They are godless communists. Okay, we're going to embrace God. We have a lot more religious references in our daily life now, our public life, than we did before. I love traveling. I spent a lot of time in Europe, and if you look at countries like Denmark, Sweden, Norway, even France, Germany, almost any country in Europe, these countries are largely atheist. The organic atheism in countries like Denmark, it's like 95%. I'm pulling that off the top of my head. I don't know the exact figure, but very, very few people in Denmark actually believe in God. Yet they're consistently rated among the happiest nations on the planet, far ahead of us. Any conceivable measure in happiness, in health, infant mortality rates, they're just head and shoulders above us.
So you think you can be a happy person as an atheist?
Absolutely.
Much happier.
A taxi driver, when I was in Denmark, I actually brought this up. I thought the guy was going to wreck because he started laughing so hard. When I told him that in America, a lot of people believe you have to believe in God to be happy. And he's like, are you kidding me? And he's laughing out loud. He shared with me, by the way, that although very, very few people in Denmark believe in God, you can opt out of this, but by default, their tax dollars actually do go to supporting the churches. And that surprised me. I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of European countries that way.
Yeah.
You can opt out, but
yeah,
by default
you're paying into the system. And he said, but I don't have a problem with that because, when I was married in the church and it didn't cost me anything. And when I die, I'm going to be buried by the church and it's not going to cost me anything. And I don't know exactly how that works. It's almost just like a community center. It's a beautiful, and frankly, the buildings are often the most beautiful buildings in any town, or the churches. I love.
Around a while.
I love the architecture. I visited the Vatican with my son when he turned 18, and we stepped inside the main cathedral, and I was like, well, if there is a heaven, this is probably what it looks like, because it was amazing.
So in terms of being happy as a humanist and stuff, and seeing other countries and stuff that you've seen where people are living out their lives and it's totally free from religion, you're coming back to here and you're seeing it a little less so, and people are unhappy about it. How do we take our humanistic ethics, or as you understand your humanistic ethics, and apply that to the future? Let's say in terms of government, how do we take those humanistic ethics and have them play out to our government?
The first thing we got to do is people have to get off their butts and go vote. I don't want to get too much into a political discussion, but a lot of people that weren't happy with the last presidential election, I talked to them and I asked, so when you went out to vote, oh, I didn't vote. Oh, you didn't? Well, all right, well, then you're at fault here. I blame you more than I blame the people that voted for the current president, because they voted the way their conscience dictated. Whether I agree with them or not, that's what they did. You didn't vote, so do you really get to complain if you can't actually vote? I really do believe that if every single American who is eligible to vote did vote, we'd have a vastly different political system than we have right now. It would be so much different. So one of the things we have to do, we have to participate. We can't, I guess we can. You're free to complain even if you don't do anything. But I really do believe that if you're going to complain, you need to be active. You can't just complain. Don't just tell me what's wrong. Tell me what right looks like, and help. Let's all work together to get there. Being a little bit more responsible with our elected leaders, because that is up to us. We elect those people. And I've heard it said many times, you get the government you deserve. And unfortunately, if so many people don't vote, then we do get the government we deserve. But not only putting the right people in office, but holding them accountable for making effective and informed decisions based on evidence. This debate about abortion rights, it's largely driven by religious proclivities. Now, as an atheist, I personally have views that are somewhat different from many atheists, of my atheist friends that I've spoken with, about just unrestricted access to abortion. Mm-hmm. And this is just purely my personal belief. I don't believe it should be used as a form of birth control. I think that it should be a free choice for a woman to make. But after a certain point, there comes a point where it's, maybe that is actually a human life now. It's not just a, but when the egg is first fertilized, you just got a blastocyst. Well, don't tell me that's actually human worth as much as the child that's in an orphanage. I don't see those two as compatible. I think our decisions need to be driven by evidence. The climate change issue. There are no scientists working in global climate science today or I shouldn't say there are no. The numbers are vanishingly small who actually challenge the idea that global climate change is driven by human activity, and it is an existential threat. Almost every single man and woman working in that field agree to that.
Even the military agrees with that.
The military, absolutely. I mentioned CCJO earlier, the Capstone Concept for Joint Operations. The purpose for that exercise is to identify threats moving out into the next quarter century. And then how are we going to structure the U.S. military to address those threats? One of the biggest threats we identified, global climate change. We're going to have more and more wars in places where water is scarce, where because water is going to become more scarce.
We just go to Greenland and tap it.
Yeah.
They got a lot of fresh water.
They do. In fact,
Antarctica, maybe we can do a pipeline from Antarctica. Just take that melt water and just pipe it up.
Well, this was one of my. I like to think that I'm a selfless person in general, but one of my recent selfish acts is I made it a point to go to Iceland to see the glaciers before they're all gone, because my grandchildren may never get to see those glaciers because they'll probably be gone. But I did get to see them. Beautiful.
Well, even looking at it from the military standpoint, something like taking evidence-based knowledge and discussing it amongst other people to come to some realization that, okay, there is a threat, there is a problem, what are those solutions going to be? That is all done in a humanistic way, because we're talking about looking at evidence, we're talking about discussing it together, we're looking at trying to plan and have some cohesion with that. And I think that also one of the things that we'll see in terms of humanistic ethics is when people have to migrate from low-lying areas and stuff, where are they going to go? Yeah. We already have refugee or illegal aliens coming from other countries. What are people going to say in Georgia when half of Florida is going to come and say, I want to live in Georgia now?
Yeah, and we have a term for that as IDPs, internally displaced persons. Basically, it's just refugees that are within the borders of your own country. And yeah, that's going to happen. A lot of Florida is going to be underwater. And I own a house in Virginia that is not terribly far from the James River, that is not terribly far from the Atlantic Ocean. And that may be beachfront property in a couple of decades. I don't know.
Well, sell it when it's beachfront.
It may work out for me. But again, I mentioned my friend earlier, the retired Green Beret, who's just a wonderful, wonderful person, even though he's a Southern Baptist. But he was talking about how he doesn't like some of the behaviors of President Trump. He doesn't like the way he talks about people. He doesn't like his personal ethical decisions. But you know what? My 401k is kicking ass, man. And that's my kids' college fund. And yeah, but what kind of world are you going to leave to your kids? There's more to America and what we stand for than just our economy. And of course I want our economy to be good. Every time the stock market dips, I take a look on my phone and I'm like, yeah, I just lost a few $1,000s. I hate that.
Well, there's the other argument is saying, well, why is it an either or? Why is it saying that if we are changing our economy, to be green and to be sustainable, we may actually do even better in our stock market?
I think that's true. And I'm not an expert in the field, but I've read a lot about that we're basically ceding any leadership we ever exercised in that field to countries like China, who are now going to be the world leaders in green energy, when it should be us. It should be the United States. I mean, I know some people don't like the term, but I consider myself a patriotic American. I love my country. I love the values that America is supposed to aspire to. We so often fail to meet those values, but it's aspirational. we're always trying to be better, or we should be. But I don't feel right now that we're necessarily trying that as hard as we should.
Well, if we also take those humanistic ethics and we go on to business and what business does, and we were talking about evidence-based, talking together, coming up with a common plan and stuff, that when we look at taking and looking at what business community can do and stuff, what's your take on what those humanistic and atheistic viewpoints, or let's say secular viewpoints, are for the business community to look at those?
I will quickly lose airspeed and altitude if I try to talk about business, because I've never been in the private sector. I was an Army officer, as we've discussed, for most of my adult life. Then when I left the Army, I was the country director for a nonprofit organization in South Korea, and now I work for the government again. So I don't feel I can really speak that intelligibly on business, though one thing I will share, and this is one of the few things I can share, there was a program a few years back called APIC, the Army Performance Improvement Criteria, and it was basically using this Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award criteria for total quality management. And what they would do is try to show how each Army base around the country, or around the world, has improved all of their processes. They eliminate non-value added. They focused on the customer. Who is the customer? We focus on that. But one of the things that we heard about over and over and over again is that, hey, this model comes from the private sector. And one of the things that every business needs to think about is how you can be good corporate citizens. Corporations are there to make money. You're there to give a return to your stockholders. But you're also there to be responsible to the rest of the world. Now, how often they actually do that, I don't know. But there was certainly a lot of lip service paid to it. That I recently went to an event. J.P. Morgan Chase hosted it for a recent Medal of Honor recipient, and one of the things that they talked about a lot was how, in fact, one of the guys came to me and asked, "Do you have volunteer opportunities in your organization?" Because this corporate person said, we are required every month. We have to give a day. We have to volunteer somewhere in the community, and that's my place of duty for my corporate job, is to volunteer. That's only one day a month, but you know what? I didn't even know they did that, and he's not taking time off of work to do that. That's where the corporation is telling him to go. You're going to go volunteer somewhere. Don't care where, but you're going to go do something to give back to the community. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, there's other ways of interacting with business too. We're consumers, and we go to deal with people, whether it's going to buy a hamburger someplace, maybe McDonald's. That's a very funny story. You're going to have to tell that story. But having interaction with other people and dealing with them, we do that through our friends, our family. To a certain extent, we're involved with our government because we have rules and regulations and law enforcement, but we also, to a great extent, deal with business. We shop, we buy things. So you're dealing with people that are in business one way or another during a day-to-day basis and stuff. So how we as humanists, atheists, secularists deal with that and stuff, you're making decisions on a day-to-day basis too with business.
Yeah, and I really do think that corporate America actually can, and I may be misreading this, but I think a lot of people in our community are kind of a little more down on corporate America than I am. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I think that private enterprise can be a very democratic institution. I mean, if I'm selling hamburgers and people stop buying my hamburgers because of some of my political activities or something I do that is not right, I may change what I'm doing because I want people to come buy my hamburgers. I think the best example of that is Chick-fil-A. Man, I love Chick-fil-A. I really love it, but I don't like what their owner stands for. And I have people in my family who are members of the LGBT community. And every time I want to stop for a Chick-fil-A, I think, yeah, but they're supporting these, gay conversion therapy and these other things. So I don't go there anymore.
Well, the spicy chicken sandwich at Wendy's, I think, is better.
Another reason not to go there.
Yeah, there's an alternative. We can go to another place and have a chicken sandwich somewhere else and stuff. And Wendy's does amazing charity work and stuff that they do.
I actually did not know that, and I love the Frosties, so.
That's the second reason to go to Wendy's. Not that we're looking for promotions.
Yeah, I was wondering, am I violating?
We're just making choices, and I think we do that on a day-to-day basis anyway when we're out there. And sometimes we're not aware that an owner is doing things that are antithetical to our own humanistic viewpoints, and having more of that out in the world so we can make those decisions like Chick-fil-A or other things. I still know people who are gay and still go to Chick-fil-A,
As do I, yeah.
And they know it, they understand it, they realize it, they still go and stuff. And other people are making other decisions about it and saying, well, I'm not going to support it and do that and stuff. So I think that we got to be kind to each other about whether they're doing it or not. But I guess there is probably a line that you got to draw at some particular point.
Yeah. I mean, I say I don't go there anymore. Occasionally I'll cave in, usually when I'm driving a long distance and I see the sign, as long as it's not on a Sunday, because they're always closed on Sunday, which I fully support their right to not be open on Sunday for whatever reason. That's perfectly fine. They're willing to take the financial hit and not be open on Sunday. Good on them.
So for let's talk a little bit more about the future and stuff. You got your kids and grandkids, you got your extended family and friends and people you've dealt with over time and other countries you've been to and stuff. What do you think are the basic takeaways that you would want them to have from you in your life and what you've done?
I'll share this story. When I was a second lieutenant, I was at the officers basic course in a place called Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Beautiful place, by the way. And there's a leadership block of instruction. We learn all these different things about order of battle for the former Soviet military. We learn about their weapon systems. But then we have somebody come in and talk about leadership. And there was a guy named Major McQueen who was a Vietnam veteran. He was enlisted when he was in Vietnam, and he was telling us all these stories. And one of my buddies asked the question, sir, based on your, at that time he had like 2.5 decades of military service, maybe more. What is the most important single thing you've learned from all of your experience? And I'm thinking we're going to get this story about how to, kill somebody in their sleep with your entrenching tool or just some crazy war story. And he said, without question, the most important thing I've learned from all of my military experience is the importance of treating every single person you meet, regardless of who they are, where they're from, with the basic human dignity they deserve. Doesn't matter if they're a junior enlisted soldier or a 4-star general. Doesn't matter of their, I don't remember if he mentioned religion, but I do remember specifically him mentioning race, ethnicity, man, woman. Every single person you meet deserves that basic human dignity. And some people just aren't very nice, but they are deserving of basic human dignity. And I feel that sometimes that's lost, and I think it's easy to lose that if your judgment is influenced by dogmatic thinking. And let's face it, I think the finest crystallization of dogmatic thinking and most pervasive example of dogmatic thinking that easily comes to my mind, at least, is religion. And if you look at it through the prism of humanism, it's a lot easier to arrive at that conclusion, that treat everybody as they deserve to be treated.
Well, I do appreciate the time you've given us today to tell us a few stories. Yeah. And if people have a chance to go and buy your book or see it online, that would be awesome for them to read through it and to do it. I know when I came out as an atheist, it was a very slow progress. And I kept thinking to myself, there's all these things that I think about in terms of my arguments, how do I defend it and that sort of things. And you put it into to book would make it a lot easier for people. So
I hope so. I hope.
it's one of the good books that they should read. So
I think so.
well, I appreciate your time, Tony, and it's been awesome to sit down and talk to you for a little while. And before we go, I want you to tell the McDonald's story because I think it's hilarious and about how I think people treat other people, but then later realize that we can do things differently. So
Yeah, absolutely.
without giving it away.
Sure. Well, I love this story because it's funny, because it's true, but it also, for me personally, it reminds me of sort of my growth and my evolution as a person. But as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons I joined the Army, I wanted to see the world. Now, I don't care what country I'm in. If I don't speak a word of the language and I can't find somebody to speak English, I'll just point at what I want, and that usually works. But at that time, I was maybe 23 years old, second lieutenant. My first time ever being out of the United States. I'd only been outside of Alabama a couple of times, and I was just cripplingly shy. And I had been in Germany for less than a week, and every single meal I had eaten was on the Army base. So it was normally Anthony's Pizza or Burger King or something at the dining facility. We call it a DFAC. And so I was going to go have a German meal. And I set off out the front gate of, I still remember this very vividly. It's called Rodendorfer Strasse. It's the Rodendorfer Street out the front gate of Leighton Barracks. And Würzburg, Germany is absolutely just breathtakingly beautiful city. And the first German restaurant I came to, German restaurants always have the menu out in front of the store. And I'm looking at the menu, and I didn't know what any of those things are. I can read the words. I can phonetically sound them out, but I don't know what they are. And I actually walked into this restaurant, and half the people turn around and, hey, Grüß Gott. And I had no idea what that was. I'm like, was it like a not? I didn't know what. So I turned around and walked out. It means greetings from God, by the way, and it's a common greeting, but I didn't know that yet. So I went to another restaurant, and I tried the same thing, and I was chickening out. I was so ashamed of myself that I didn't have the nerve to go in and order a German meal, because I basically spoke 2 words of German. Wie geht's? How are you? And danke, thank you. So then I decided, forget it, I'm just going to go back to the Army base. I'll eat Anthony's Pizza again. And I truly was ashamed of myself. I mean, I'm making light of it, but I was kind of ashamed that I didn't have the courage to order a simple meal. But then I got lost, and I couldn't find my way back to the base, and I'm really getting hungry at this point. And so then I saw the Golden Arches. I see McDonald's, and I'm like, I convinced myself in a snap decision, baby steps, this is a partial victory. I'm going to go eat, at least it's not Burger King. At least it's not on the Army base. It's a German McDonald's. So I'll go to German McDonald's. The next time I'll eat at a proper German restaurant. And when I walked in, because I don't speak any German, I'm looking at the menu trying to make sure I can actually navigate this. I see a picture of a hamburger and the word hamburger. I'm like, wow, they call it a hamburger. I think that's a German word, by the way, I'm not sure. And again, this is the word for French fries in Germany is pommes frites. But if you are uninitiated, it looks like it's pronounced pommes frites. That's the way it's spelled phonetically. And there's a picture of French fries that says pommes frites. And then it says cola. So I'm like, okay, I can order hamburger, pommes frites, and cola. And then if you look at the price, the cheapest one had the word kleine beside it. So that must be the small. The most expensive one had this word that there's a letter I'd never seen before. It's G-R-O, and then this thing that looks like a capital cursive B. And so I thought that word was grobe. That's what it looked like, grobe. I didn't know that thing is called an Etzet or a Scharfes S, and it sounds like 2 S's, so it's actually gross. So the most expensive one, I thought, is a grobe. That must be the large. And so I walked up to the counter, and the lady says, something like, was möchten Sie essen, or something like that. And I did what any, self-respecting American patriot would do, a barrel-chested freedom fighter. I spoke English really loud, and I used hand and arm signals, So I said, yeah, I want 2 hamburgers. And the lady nodded politely, didn't crack a smile, and she pushed the button on the register. She looked at me again. Said, and then I remembered in Germany, I was told this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. So I thought, I just ordered 3 hamburgers, but that's fine. I don't want to confuse them. So then I adjusted and I said, I want 1 grobe pommes frites. And she nodded politely and pushed the button and looked at me again. And I said, and 1 grobe cola. She pushed the button and looked at me and in just impeccable English asked me, will that be for here or to go? And everybody in the restaurant erupted in laughter. And I looked around, and I know my face is just glowing red. I said, every one of you people speak English, don't you? And they're like, of course. I'm like, man, I said, well, it was going to be for here, but now there's no way I'm staying here. It's to go. And I walked back and found my way to the base, eating my Groba pommes frites and 2 hamburgers and Groba cola. Just the first of many instances I've had around the world, making a complete ass of myself trying to speak the local language, or trying to do something in the local language as a dumb foreigner.
That's a fun story. That's a fun story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again.
You
Appreciate
bet.
it very
You
much.
bet.
Now off to drinking with atheists.
Let's go have a drink.